For 15 years, I've been a forest ranger, patrolling trails, monitoring wildlife, and safeguarding the natural treasures of our national parks. It's a life I cherish: solitude, connection with nature, and the silent, unspoken beauty of untouched wilderness. But Mount Rainier was different. The mountain loomed larger than life, its snow-capped peak piercing the clouds like a guardian of secrets long buried. I had been sent there on a special assignment. Reports of missing hikers had surged alarmingly in the past 2 months. Seasoned climbers, casual tourists, none were safe. Local legends whispered about strange lights, eerie sounds, and shadows that didn't belong. But I dismissed them, chalking it up to superstition and the inherent dangers of the wild. I should have listened. My partner for this mission was Sam, another veteran ranger. Sam was pragmatic and steady, his dry humor often a welcome balm during grueling assignments. We arrived at Mount Rainier in the early hours of a chilly autumn morning, armed with supplies, maps, and an unshakable confidence that we could solve this mystery. The park was eerily quiet, as if the very air was holding its breath. Our mission began simply enough, retracing the last known steps of the missing hikers. The trail we followed was well-marked but unnervingly barren. No footprints, no signs of wildlife, just the crunch of our boots on frost-covered earth. It felt wrong. "Feels like we're walking into a trap," Sam muttered, breaking the silence. I nodded but said nothing. Deep down, I felt it too, a sensation of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking our every move. About 3 miles in, we found the first clue: a shredded backpack caught in the branches of a low-lying tree. Its contents were scattered haphazardly, a stark contrast to the careful organization hikers typically maintain. Then came the claw marks on the bark. Not bear, not cougar, something else entirely. Something I couldn't identify. The deeper we ventured into Mount Rainier National Park, the more oppressive the atmosphere grew. It wasn't just the fog rolling in or the eerie silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was something more primal, something ancient and unspoken. For years, I had heard rumors, murmurs among fellow rangers and locals, about the park's dark history. They spoke of things that happened in the deepest reaches of the woods: disappearances, strange lights in the sky, whispers in the wind. But like most of my colleagues, I had always dismissed these tales as nothing more than folklore and overactive imaginations. After all, people often fear the unknown, and it was easier to believe in myths than to face the real dangers of the wilderness. Yet now, as we trudged further into the heart of Mount Rainier, the stories I had once scoffed at seemed less like fiction and more like warnings. Sam's usual calm demeanor had begun to crack. He had always been the rational one between us, the one who didn't let his emotions dictate his actions. But today, his eyes kept darting around, his brow furrowed, and he seemed restless, as if he was trying to hold on to something he could no longer grasp. We stopped at a clearing around midday to take a break. The sun was obscured by thick clouds, casting the world in a ghostly, muted light. Sam sat down on a large rock, his rifle leaning against a nearby tree. He ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, unable to put it into words, but I knew exactly what he meant. There was something here, something waiting. The forest was alive, but not in the way we understood it. The trees, their towering trunks stretching toward the heavens, seemed to loom over us like silent witnesses. The rustling of leaves and the faint sound of cracking branches felt deliberate, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, watching us. "We shouldn't be here," Sam muttered under his breath. I tried to shake off the unease settling in my chest. We had a job to do: find the missing hikers, get back to base, and report. Simple enough, or so it should have been. But it felt wrong now, like we were intruding on something far older and much more dangerous than either of us could understand. I glanced around, noticing the absence of wildlife. We hadn't seen a single animal since we started this morning. No squirrels, no birds, no movement in the underbrush. For a park that was supposed to be teeming with life, this was unsettling. Maybe they went off the trail, got lost, and... "No," Sam interrupted, cutting me off with a firm shake of his head. "I've been a ranger long enough to know when something's off. And this is off. It's not just the missing hikers. There's something else. Something wrong." His words hung in the air, thick with tension. I could feel the weight of them, each syllable pressing down on me like a physical force. At that moment, I heard it, the faintest sound, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. At first, I thought it was just the trees creaking in the breeze, but then I heard it again. A voice. Not human, but close, something ancient, distant, and unintelligible. It sent a shiver down my spine, and for the first time in years, my instincts as a ranger were telling me to turn around, to leave this place. But I couldn't. We couldn't. I turned to Sam, but he was already on his feet, his expression grim. His hand was resting on the rifle slung over his shoulder, and I saw the glint of caution in his eyes. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned toward the dense forest ahead. "We're not alone," he said. The words sent a jolt of panic through me, but I held it together. My training kicked in. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe other rangers had been nearby, or hikers had strayed off the trail. But I knew better than to dismiss Sam's instincts. They had saved us more times than I could count. The wind picked up again, the eerie whispering growing louder, now almost a chant. My heart raced, and I gripped the strap of my pack, my eyes scanning the trees. Sam and I slowly moved toward the source of the sound, trying to stay as quiet as possible, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of moss and pine needles beneath us. As we rounded a bend in the trail, I froze. There, in the distance, something shimmered in the fog, a flickering, translucent shape, like a person but not. It moved swiftly through the trees, its form flickering in and out of existence. I barely had time to process what I was seeing before it vanished into the mist, leaving only an empty silence behind. I turned to Sam, my breath caught in my throat, but he wasn't there. I looked around, panic seizing me. He had vanished too. I was alone. The forest around me felt suffocating, the trees closing in as the fog thickened. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. A cold chill wrapped around me, and I suddenly felt like an intruder, one who had awakened something that should have remained buried. My fingers trembled as I reached for my radio, but there was no signal. No help would come. I wasn't just lost. I was trapped. The panic that surged through me felt like ice in my veins. I had never been truly afraid in the forest before. As a ranger for 15 years, I had seen and experienced a multitude of strange and dangerous things, but nothing like this. There was an unsettling sense of inevitability now, like I was part of something I couldn't understand and, worse, had no way of escaping. The first few moments after Sam's disappearance felt like a blur. I called out his name, my voice weak and trembling, but there was no answer. The forest swallowed my words, and the fog pressed in even tighter, a blanket that obscured my surroundings. I couldn't even tell where the trail had gone anymore. The markers I had trusted so many times were now hidden beneath layers of mist. The dense woods felt like an entirely different place, alien, oppressive. I tried to regain some sense of control. "Stay calm," I muttered to myself, repeating the mantra I had used in dangerous situations before. But nothing felt right. My heart thudded heavily in my chest, and my mind raced, running through possible explanations. Had Sam been taken? Could someone else be out here, hunting us? Maybe it was a bear, or even a person. A deranged hiker, or someone who had been lost longer than I had realized. The options seemed endless, but none of them fit the deep, unsettling sense of wrongness that clung to the air. I started moving again, more cautiously this time. I had to find Sam. He was still out there somewhere, and I wasn't about to let whatever force had taken him take me too. The whispering voices were no longer a distant sound. They surrounded me now. The more I tried to focus on them, the clearer they became. The words were nonsensical, but there was a rhythm, a strange cadence, as if they were trying to communicate something to me. I walked for what felt like hours. My legs burned from the effort, and the sense of disorientation grew with every step. The fog was relentless, swallowing everything, and with it, my certainty. Every tree looked the same. Every turn I made felt like a step deeper into a labyrinth I couldn't escape. I wanted to scream out in frustration, but I held back. It was as if the moment I let go of my composure, I would fall completely into the madness. Then, just as I thought I was about to lose all sense of direction, I saw it. A break in the fog. A small clearing appeared ahead, with a single, gnarled tree at its center. It stood out among the others, twisted and ancient, its roots sprawling across the ground like dark veins. A sense of familiarity washed over me, like I had seen this tree before, or at least something like it. There was a sharp pang in my chest, an echo of something that had happened long ago. But before I could process it, my attention was drawn to something else. Sam's rifle. It was laying on the ground, just outside the clearing. The sight of it stopped me cold. Sam never went anywhere without that rifle. It wasn't just his weapon, it was a part of him. I felt a chill seep into my bones as I crouched down to examine it. The rifle was clean, untouched, and still securely latched in its holster. But the strap was frayed, torn as if something had yanked it from his hand. I reached down to pick it up, my fingers trembling. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural sound, a growl primal and deep, came from behind me. My blood ran cold. I froze, unable to turn. The growl wasn't from any animal I knew. It was something worse, something older. With a quick motion, I spun around, raising the rifle. But there was nothing there, just the twisted trees and fog swirling like ghosts. I waited, every nerve in my body screaming for me to move, to run. But I didn't. The forest around me seemed to hold its breath. Suddenly, from behind a thick cluster of trees, a figure emerged, Sam. But something was wrong. His movements were jerky, disjointed, like a puppet controlled by unseen strings. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. He was covered in dirt, scratches, and what appeared to be blood. He didn't speak. He didn't move like Sam. It was as if his body was there, but the person I knew, the person who had stood by my side for years, wasn't. "Sam," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't respond. Instead, his mouth opened, but the words that came out were not his. They were distorted, a mixture of guttural growls and the same unintelligible whispers that had haunted me since I entered the park. I took a step back, my heart pounding. This wasn't Sam. Whatever stood before me was not Sam. And it wasn't alone. From the shadows of the trees, more figures emerged. Some were human, but their faces were twisted and wrong, their eyes wide and vacant. Others were far more unsettling, vague, half-formed shapes that flickered in and out of existence like specters. They seemed to materialize from the very fog itself, their forms pulsing as if alive. I raised the rifle and fired, the loud crack of the shot deafening in the otherwise silent forest. The bullet passed through one of the shadowy figures, but it didn't collapse. Instead, it seemed to absorb the shot, its form distorting, shifting, before it vanished back into the fog. The truth hit me like a wave. This wasn't just a missing person case. There was something far darker at work in Mount Rainier. Something that defied explanation, something older than the land itself. And whatever it was playing with us. Sam was gone, lost to whatever force controlled this place. I wasn't sure if I would leave this park alive, or if I would join the others who had disappeared before me, their souls claimed by something ancient and malevolent. But one thing was certain, I had made a terrible mistake coming here. Now, the only thing left to do was survive. As I trudged through the dense fog, each step felt heavier than the last. But it wasn't just the physical exhaustion that was draining me. The unsettling feeling that something was following me, something otherworldly, was gnawing at the edges of my mind, pushing all rational thought aside. The deeper I went into the fog, the more the park seemed to twist around me. This place, which I once thought I understood so well, now felt alien, its rules no longer obeying nature or logic. At first, I had thought of Mount Rainier as just another stop on a long list of parks I had visited over the years. It had been a familiar place, one I thought I had nothing to fear. But there was an inexplicable tension in the air here, something beneath the surface that I had failed to acknowledge before. Mount Rainier was known for its unpredictable weather and harsh terrain, but I had always handled those challenges. What I hadn't expected was the malice that seemed to seep from the very ground itself. In the midst of my growing paranoia, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been drawing me here. Had it been a series of events that led me to this moment? A pattern I hadn't recognized? Or had something else, some darker force, been guiding my path? The voices, the strange fog, Sam's disappearance. All these elements had woven together into something far more intricate than I had originally realized. In the beginning, I had simply been following protocol, conducting routine research for the Forest Service. I had no reason to suspect that something far more sinister lay hidden in the park's depths. But now, everything seemed connected in ways I couldn't explain. One thing became clear as I continued to stumble through the trees. I wasn't the first to experience this. I had heard the stories before, passed off as legends by the locals, dismissed by visitors who only saw the park's grandeur and beauty. But there were rumors, whispers of strange occurrences in the park, of rangers who went missing and were never found, of hikers who lost their way and were never seen again. They were told in hushed tones, as if the very mention of the dark side of the park might summon its wrath. I had dismissed them myself, thinking it was just the result of the park's dangerous terrain, its unpredictable weather. But now I wasn't so sure. One of the more unsettling aspects of these stories had been the constant reference to the Watcher. The locals spoke of a figure, an entity, that lurked in the shadows, watching those who ventured too far into the park. Some described it as a massive creature, others as a human-like figure, but all were in agreement that it was a malevolent force, one that could not be reasoned with. It was said that the Watcher had been present for centuries, a dark presence that had witnessed the countless lives lost to the mountains. The stories described it as a being who would appear at the moment of a person's greatest fear, feeding on their terror, and sometimes it would take them forever. The Watcher was a reminder that the mountains had their own laws, ones that no human could comprehend. I couldn't help but wonder if this entity was responsible for Sam's disappearance. Had he encountered it, and if so, could I face it myself? The fog was thickening, its tendrils curling around the trees, pulling me deeper into the unknown. But as much as I feared what might lie ahead, I couldn't let Sam's fate be in vain. I had to push forward, to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. The growing complexity of the situation also involved the dynamic between me and the park itself. My connection to this place, forged over years of being a ranger, had made me arrogant. I had always believed that I understood nature, that I could predict its patterns and behavior. I had respected the mountains, but I had never truly feared them. Now, in the face of the inexplicable, I realized how little I truly knew. The fog, the strange figures, the eerie whispers, they weren't just part of the natural landscape. They were a force that defied explanation, something that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. I had spent my entire life studying the wilderness, but I was woefully unprepared for what I was facing now. There were also the small moments that felt out of place, like they didn't belong to the narrative I had constructed in my mind. I remembered Sam mentioning strange things on our first day, mutterings about the mist, and how it seemed to distort time. At first, I had chalked it up to fatigue or the stress of the journey, but now, as I thought back on it, those words felt like a warning. Had Sam sensed something that I had missed? His behavior on the trip had been erratic at times, especially when we first entered the deeper parts of the park. He had grown more distant, more withdrawn. I had thought he was just tired, perhaps mentally worn out from our work, but now I wasn't so sure. Had something been trying to manipulate his mind? Or was he simply overwhelmed by the very forces at play in the park? Then there was the land itself. The Great Smoky Mountains had long been known for their mystique and otherworldliness, but Mount Rainier had its own reputation, one tied to ancient traditions and indigenous myths that spoke of the spirits of the mountain. The mountain wasn't just a place, it was alive, a sentient entity that held secrets older than time itself. And as I ventured deeper into the fog, I began to wonder if I had crossed a line, if I had disturbed something that should have remained untouched. Maybe this was a battle between us, the humans who dared to trespass, and the forces of nature that we could never fully comprehend. My connection to the land was being tested in ways I had never imagined. The mountain was no longer just a park, it was a living, breathing entity, a place where the boundaries between reality and the supernatural were blurred. The more I encountered these strange phenomena, the more I realized that I was part of a larger, darker story, one that had been unfolding long before I had set foot on the trail. I had come to the mountain seeking knowledge, but I was beginning to wonder if it had come for me instead. The fog had swallowed the path entirely. My boots crunched on the uneven ground beneath me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the earth itself was shifting, as though the very land was conspiring to hold me captive. I knew this mountain like the back of my hand, but this was different. The fog, thick and suffocating, distorted everything. Sounds were muffled, like a blanket over my senses. The forest had become unnervingly silent, the usual hum of insects and rustling leaves completely absent. The moment I had entered this strange, liminal space, I had felt it, the first hint of something wrong. But as I ventured deeper, that unsettling feeling grew into a heavy, oppressive weight. The trees were not just trees anymore. The shadows between them seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and the air had a palpable charge, as if something were waiting to happen. It wasn't until I stumbled upon Sam's abandoned campsite that the reality of my situation truly sank in. The sight stopped me cold. The camp was exactly how we had left it, except for one glaring detail: Sam was gone. His gear, his jacket, even his boots, all left behind as though he had simply walked away in the middle of the night. But there was no sign of struggle, no indication of what had happened. It was as if he had evaporated into the mist. My mente set. I couldn't believe it. Sam couldn't have just vanished like that. I scoured the site, looking for any clue, but it felt like the more I searched, the more I found nothing. The tent was collapsed on one side, its poles bent, but everything inside was in place. His map was still open, the last route he'd traced out was clear, but there were no new marks, no evidence of his next move. It was as if he had been taken right off the face of the earth. Panic began to set in, clawing at my chest. What the hell was going on? This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. I tried calling out for Sam, but my voice seemed to dissolve into the fog. No response. Nothing. My breath quickened, and the fog seemed to thicken even more, as if it were closing in on me, smothering me. I felt the distinct sensation of eyes on me, watching me from every angle. But I couldn't see a single thing beyond the fog. It was as though the world had narrowed down to just me, the empty campsite, and the consuming whiteness that felt both alive and dead at the same time. It wasn't until I heard it, the first sound that wasn't swallowed by the mist, that I froze. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper. The voice wasn't coming from any specific direction, but it was clear. And it wasn't a voice I recognized. Come, find me. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I strained my ears, listening more closely, but the whisper seemed to come from everywhere at once, circling me like an unseen predator. It was neither malevolent nor reassuring. It was simply an invitation. Or perhaps a command. Sam, I whispered, my voice hoarse. Is that you? The whisper came again, but this time it was different, more insistent, more urgent. Come, to the heart. The words had a strange, almost hypnotic quality to them. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground, but I couldn't fight the pull to follow the voice. The fog had become an all-encompassing presence, filling my senses, distorting the world around me. And yet, I found myself compelled to move. I knew I should turn back. I knew I should gather myself, find a way out of this nightmare. But something within me, a primal instinct, urged me forward, deeper into the mist. Without thinking, I grabbed the compass from my backpack, hoping to regain some sense of direction. But when I looked at it, the needle spun wildly, as if there was no magnetic north. I was lost, completely lost. The world was wrong. The park was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but something had changed within me. The mountain wasn't just an environment anymore. It had become a living, breathing entity, one with its own rules, its own will. And I was no longer a guest here. I was part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. The whispering grew louder, more frantic, pulling me forward with an unseen force. I followed it through the fog, my senses alert to every crackling branch or shifting breeze, but nothing could prepare me for what I found. I came to a clearing, an open space surrounded by towering trees. And in the center of it, there was a figure, a person, or something that looked like a person. It was hard to tell, for it was barely visible through the haze, as if it existed only halfway in this world. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The figure stood motionless, its back to me, but I could tell it was watching me. Its body was shrouded in a cloak of shadow, and its presence seemed to warp the air itself. The trees around the clearing bent in unnatural angles, their branches twisted and gnarled, reaching toward the figure like desperate hands. Sam! I called out again, my voice barely audible, as though the fog itself were swallowing my words. The figure didn't respond. It was then that I realized the truth. The figure wasn't Sam. It wasn't anyone. It was something far older, far more terrifying. And it was waiting for me to come closer. I was no longer in control. My feet moved forward of their own accord, each step heavy, as though I were sinking deeper into something much darker. My heart raced, but I couldn't stop. The figure was beckoning me, pulling me closer. I was no longer searching for Sam. I was searching for something else, something that had drawn me to this cursed place in the first place. And now, there was no turning back. The mountain had me in its grasp. The turning point had arrived. The question was no longer whether I could survive. It was whether I could escape the mountain's grip before it consumed me whole. My heart was a drumbeat in my chest, loud and erratic, but it seemed so distant now, as if the fog itself had swallowed up my senses. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting wood, yet it felt impossibly dry in my mouth. I was close now, too close. The figure, no, the entity, was still in the center of the clearing, its form more distinct now, though it seemed to flicker, as if it were never fully solid. It was both there and not there at the same time. A shadow, a ghost. I couldn't stop myself from taking one more step forward. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave this nightmare behind, but the whispering had returned, this time almost deafening, buzzing in my mind. It was too late. I had passed the point of no return. The figure, if it could even be called that, shifted, its form elongating as though responding to my presence. The branches around the clearing groaned, as if protesting my intrusion, and the ground beneath me seemed to pulse. I felt the tremor in my feet, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Something inside me understood. This was no ordinary mountain. It was a living, breathing entity, and I had just disturbed its slumber. My legs refused to obey me now. I couldn't move forward, couldn't go back. I was frozen in place, trapped in the haze of fear and the pull of something ancient and powerful. A low, guttural sound rumbled from the figure's form, almost like a growl, a deep, resonating noise that vibrated through my bones. It was then that I understood. This asterisk was what had been waiting for me all along. The reality of it hit me like a slap to the face. The mountains were alive, in ways I couldn't even comprehend. And this was what had drawn Sam away. The same force, the same pull that had led me here. The figure was part of the mountain, an agent of its will, and it was leading me into its depths, where the rules of the natural world no longer applied. I tried to call out for Sam again, but my voice seemed to dissolve in the air, lost to the deafening sound of the wind howling through the trees. The fog thickened, wrapping around my body like a cold blanket. I could feel it, the weight of the air pressing down on me, making it harder to breathe. Each breath I took felt shallow, as if there were less oxygen with every passing moment. But there was something more, an overwhelming sense of dread that crawled under my skin, filling my veins with icy panic. The entity before me was no longer a distant figure. It was approaching me, its form flickering with erratic energy. I could feel its presence, almost like a cold wind, wrapping around my neck, suffocating me. The closer it got, the more the clearing seemed to distort, as though reality itself were warping. The trees twisted in impossible angles, their branches reaching out as if they had minds of their own. But I could not tear my eyes away from the figure in the center. A whisper again, louder, more insistent. "Join us." The words slithered into my brain, curling around my thoughts like a serpent. It was too much for any sane mind to comprehend. The pull grew stronger, harder to resist. I could feel myself slipping, my resolve weakening with each passing second. The thing before me wasn't just an entity. It was a force, a presence that had been here long before human eyes ever laid claim to the land. It was as ancient as the mountain itself, as ancient as time. It was the heart of the mountain, the living, breathing pulse that powered it. I couldn't fight it. The more I tried to struggle, to regain control of my body, the less I could feel my limbs. They had become heavy like stone, sluggish, unresponsive. A primal part of me fought to hold on to the will to run, but the rest of me was already surrendering. It wasn't the fear that paralyzed me. It was the certainty that I was facing something that couldn't be escaped. The figure was no longer a shape. It was a presence, a void. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the fog began to dissipate. The figure vanished. The clearing was still. The wind stopped howling. For a moment, I thought I had imagined the whole thing, that the terror was a result of fatigue, the mountain playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. I was not free. I turned slowly, my feet dragging beneath me, and that's when I saw it, the truth, the consequence of my decision. The campsite, Sam's campsite, and the unmistakable footprints leading deeper into the mountain, the unmistakable direction he had gone. He hadn't vanished. He had been taken. But now, he wasn't just lost. He was part of it, part of the mountain's call. I could feel it now, his presence lingering in the air, woven into the very fabric of the land. Sam had joined the mountain. I stumbled backward, my head spinning, but the fog had already returned, thickening, swallowing me whole. The mountain had claimed him, and it was now waiting for me. I couldn't help but wonder, how many others had walked these same paths before me? How many had heard the whispers, followed the call, and never returned? The mountain didn't just take, it consumed. I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. I was now part of the land, bound to the mountain's ancient will, and the consequences of my curiosity were clear. There was no way out, and I would never be the same again. The fog was thick around me, blurring the world into a dull, suffocating haze. The silence was deafening, and my mind raced, overwhelmed by the events that had transpired. Sam's disappearance, the figure in the clearing, the whispering call of the mountain. It was all too much. The weight of what I had discovered pressed down on me like the very earth beneath my feet. My heart pounded, and yet my body felt numb. I stood at the edge of the abyss, both physically and mentally. I had been a forest ranger for 15 years. I had seen the wild in all its forms, and I knew better than most what could lurk in the shadows. But nothing had prepared me for this, the living, breathing force that was Mount Rainier, and the entity that haunted its depths. I had come here for answers, seeking to uncover secrets of the land, and now I realized that I was part of the mystery. I had been lured in, just like so many before me. The mountain didn't just claim its victims, it transformed them, shaping their fates into something unrecognizable. At that moment, I could feel the pull of the mountain's ancient power, still trying to take hold of me. The fog, the whispers, the unnatural stillness. Everything about this place made me question my sanity. And yet, there was something else, something deeper than fear. It was a faint stirring inside me, like a flicker of hope in the midst of overwhelming darkness. I had to resist. I had to fight. The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. I wasn't alone in this. Sam might be lost to the mountain, but I wasn't going to be its next victim. I had walked through forests all my life, studied the land, understood its rhythms. If I had learned anything over the years, it was that nature always left a trace. Nothing could be entirely hidden, even by something as powerful as the mountain. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. My legs were still heavy, and my mind threatened to slip back into the abyss, but I forced myself to focus. The mountain might have its grip on me, but I had something it didn't: will. I turned, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of Sam, for any clue that might lead me to him. I refused to believe he was completely gone. No matter how deep the mountain had pulled him, I knew there had to be something left of him. Some trace of his presence, some way to reverse this curse. The whispers had stopped for now, but I could still feel the lingering energy, thick and oppressive, as if the land itself was watching me. The very trees around me seemed to groan in response, their branches shifting unnaturally. I forced myself to move, step by step, careful not to slip into the trance-like state the mountain had tried to put me in earlier. I had to focus. I couldn't let myself become a part of this place, another lost soul swallowed by its depths. I remembered something, the old legends. Stories passed down by the Native American tribes that once lived in these lands, about the spirits of the mountain, about the force that resided deep within its core. The ancients spoke of it in hushed tones, warning the unwary to stay away from the peaks, to never venture too far into the wilderness. They said the mountain was a living entity, its own consciousness, and that it called to those who dared to tread too close. But they also spoke of a way to survive, of how the spirit could be challenged, resisted, even outwitted. It wasn't just a passive force, it could be fought, even tamed, by those with the strength to endure. The stories flickered in my mind like a beacon in the dark. They weren't just myths, they had been written by those who had lived this reality. There was a way out. There had to be. I pushed forward, using every ounce of my training, every survival skill I had acquired over the years. I found a trail, faint but visible, and began to follow it. The ground beneath me was uneven, and the trees seemed to crowd closer, their gnarled roots twisting up from the earth like hands reaching to drag me back. But I didn't let them stop me. I remembered the stories, the warnings, and the challenges they spoke of. To survive the mountain, I had to remember that I wasn't just a man walking through the woods. I was a part of this land, a part of its cycle. I had to become one with it, but not in the way the mountain wanted. I had to reclaim my own will, my own strength. As I walked deeper into the wilderness, the fog started to lift, and the sky began to clear. The whispers returned, but they were no longer inescapable. I could hear them, but now I could ignore them. The mountain's hold on me was weakening, just as the legend said it would, if I could withstand it long enough. I had to hold on to my sense of self. I found myself at the foot of the mountain, looking up at its towering peaks. The trees gave way to open sky, and the true scale of the mountain was laid bare. I had reached the heart of it. The entity, the force that had called to me, was no longer just an oppressive presence. It was a test, an ancient force that had been here long before I ever set foot on this land. And now I was ready to face it. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my breath coming in slow, deliberate gasps. I had come here searching for answers, for truths buried deep within the mountain's secrets. But I had learned something far more important. The key to overcoming the mountain was not in the battle itself. It was in the acceptance that I was part of the land, part of the story it told. The mountain did not conquer me. I had conquered myself. I turned, walking back toward the trail, the whispers fading behind me. Sam's fate remained unknown, but I knew one thing for certain. The mountain no longer had the power to claim me. I had found my way out, and with that, I had found the strength to move on. I had faced the darkness and survived. The mountain had lost, and I had won. The fog had lifted slightly, but the air remained thick with the oppressive weight of the mountain. The trees around me seemed to lean in, as though watching my every move, their ancient branches creaking as though they were whispering to one another, sharing some unspoken knowledge. I wasn't sure if the mountain was testing me, or if it was simply toying with me, but I felt every fiber of my being tense with the knowledge that the moment I had been dreading was fast approaching. The mountain, for all its beauty, was hiding something dark beneath its surface, something that would soon reveal itself fully. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I'd ever be ready, but I couldn't stop. There was no turning back now. My mind kept returning to Sam, his desperate scream in the night, the eerie sensation of being watched, the feeling that whatever force had taken hold of this place was slowly inching closer to me. I had failed him once by not recognizing the danger sooner. I couldn't fail him again. I moved slowly, carefully, my boots crunching through the dry underbrush as I continued along the narrow trail. The mountain had been silent for what felt like hours, but I knew better than to trust it. Silence was deceptive here. It was as much a weapon as the storms that often swept across the peaks. The mountain knew how to lull its prey into a false sense of security before striking with deadly force. I was prepared, in a way. My years of experience as a forest ranger had taught me how to read the land, how to listen to the subtle shifts in the wind and the signs that other animals left behind. But this wasn't the land I knew. It wasn't the land I had been trained to understand. This was something else, something older, something powerful. The stories from the local legends about Mount Rainier echoed in my mind, each word a cold reminder of the ancient forces that thrived here. I had heard tales of people disappearing, of strange phenomena that couldn't be explained. At first, I had dismissed them as folklore, stories told around campfires to scare off the unwary. But now, I was beginning to wonder if the mountain had more to offer than I had ever imagined. I glanced around nervously. The trees, which had once seemed like friendly sentinels, now seemed ominous, their twisted shapes blocking out the sun. I noticed the way the branches swayed, even though the wind had died down completely. I wasn't alone. I could feel the presence of something watching me from the shadows, something that had been here long before I set foot on these lands. It was waiting, patient, almost as if it had all the time in the world. I couldn't help but shiver. I came to a clearing, and the atmosphere seemed to shift dramatically. The temperature dropped sharply, and the air around me seemed to hum with energy. It felt like I had crossed some invisible threshold, one that separated the known from the unknown. The mountain was no longer a passive landscape. It was alive, aware of my every movement. I could feel its gaze upon me, and it was suffocating. I had arrived at the place where Sam had gone missing, the area that had caused my nerves to tighten in the days since I had first set foot in this cursed wilderness. I knew this was where everything had gone wrong, and yet I couldn't help but feel the pull to go deeper, to understand the truth behind the terror that gripped this place. It was as though the mountain itself was calling to me, daring me to venture further, daring me to uncover its dark secrets. I crouched down, inspecting the ground for any signs of Sam. I had to find something, anything, that could guide me to him. My heart raced with every step I took. There was something wrong here, something more sinister than I had expected. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now. The whispers, soft at first, had returned, curling through the air like 1,000 voices speaking at once. But I couldn't understand the words. They weren't meant for me to hear. They were meant to keep me confused, lost. A low growl broke through the whispers, a sound that made my blood freeze. I whipped around, my breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, but there was no mistaking the sound now. It was real. The growl came again, low and guttural, as though it came from deep within the earth itself. My body tensed instinctively. Something was coming. Something was close. I reached for the rifle slung over my shoulder, though I knew it wouldn't be enough if what I feared was about to materialize. But it was the only defense I had. I steadied my breathing, forcing myself to remain calm. I couldn't let panic take hold. Not now, not when everything was at stake. I felt the pull again, the deep, magnetic tug of the mountain. It wasn't just the landscape calling to me now. It was something more ancient, more primal. I could sense the darkness gathering around me, a heavy pressure that made it difficult to think, to breathe. It was as if the very air was closing in, suffocating me from all sides. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a battle for my very soul. The mountain wasn't just trying to trap me. It was trying to consume me, to take everything that I was and turn it into something else, something that belonged to it. I had to fight back. I had to be stronger than whatever force was pressing down on me. The growl came again, louder now, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the trees. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I had ever encountered before. I took a deep breath, adjusting my grip on the rifle, preparing myself for whatever was coming. I had reached the point of no return. There would be no turning back once this began. I would either face the darkness and uncover the secrets of the mountain, or I would become part of it. And I wasn't about to let that happen, not without a fight. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as though the very mountain was holding its breath. The low growl echoed once again through the trees, but this time it was closer, much closer. My pulse quickened. I could hear the crunching of leaves, the snapping of twigs, as something large moved swiftly toward me from the dense forest. I wasn't alone anymore. Whatever it was no longer lurking in the shadows. It had found me. I tightened my grip on the rifle, the cold metal reassuring against my sweaty palms. My breath was shallow, quick. I tried to steady myself, but my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. The stories, the local legends, the whispers among the rangers, they all suddenly felt far too real. Mount Rainier wasn't just a mountain. It was something ancient. It had secrets buried deep within it, secrets that had been kept for centuries, secrets that were now waking up. I scanned the trees, trying to locate the source of the growling. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, but I couldn't see anything. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement. Something large and dark, moving too quickly to be a normal animal. My heart skipped a beat. It was massive, almost impossible to make out, but I could see the outline of its shape. Too broad, too long, too unnatural to be any creature I had ever encountered in all my years as a ranger. The growl grew louder, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through my bones. My instincts screamed at me to run, to flee, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in place, unable to tear my eyes away from the darkness that moved closer. I had come here for answers, but now, faced with the truth of what lay hidden in these woods, I wasn't sure I was ready for what I was about to face. And then I saw it, its eyes. They glowed in the darkness like molten amber, shining with an intelligence that sent a jolt of pure terror through me. The creature was huge, towering above me, its form blurred and indistinct as it moved through the trees with an eerie fluidity. It was like nothing I had ever seen, a thing that seemed to exist between worlds, neither entirely animal nor entirely something else. It was a shadow come to life, a nightmare manifested in flesh. I tried to raise the rifle, my hands shaking uncontrollably, but the creature was faster than I could react. In a blur of movement, it lunged at me, its monstrous limbs extending with unnatural speed. A primal, guttural roar ripped through the air as its jaws snapped just inches from my face. The force of the attack knocked me off my feet, sending me sprawling to the ground. I scrambled to get up, but the creature was on me, its claws digging into the earth beside me, the stench of its breath overwhelming. I had no time to think. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, and my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I kicked out, catching the creature in the chest. It recoiled, but only for a moment before it lunged again. I managed to fire a shot, but the bullet went wide, missing its mark entirely. I cursed under my breath. I had to get control, had to think clearly, but my body was operating on pure instinct, and my mind was racing. The creature snarled, its teeth bared, as it circled me. I could feel its eyes burning into me, studying me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I knew that if I hesitated, even for a second, it would be the end. This wasn't a simple predator. It was something more, something that had been lurking here in the shadows for longer than I could comprehend. I pushed myself to my feet, scanning the area around me. There was no escape. The mountain had trapped me here, just as it had trapped countless others before me. But I wasn't ready to give up. I wasn't going to be just another lost soul in its depths. The growl intensified as the creature moved toward me again, this time faster than before. But I was ready. I knew I couldn't rely on my weapon alone. My years as a ranger had taught me how to survive in the wild, how to use my surroundings to my advantage. And I had to do that now, before it was too late. I backed toward a large rock formation that loomed in the clearing. The creature followed, its eyes gleaming with hunger. As it charged at me once again, I ducked, narrowly avoiding its claws as they slashed through the air where I had been just seconds before. I took a step back and then pushed off the rock, using it as leverage to launch myself into the air. The creature was too slow to react. I managed to grab a heavy branch that had fallen from a tree, and I swung it with all my strength. The blow connected with the side of its head, and it stumbled back, momentarily dazed. I didn't hesitate. I swung again, aiming for its eyes, and this time the branch hit its target. The creature howled in pain, its massive form thrashing in the air. I couldn't stop now. I had to finish this. I pressed forward, using every ounce of strength I had left. The creature recoiled, its eyes wild with rage and pain. It snarled, shaking its head as if to clear the disorientation, but I could see the cracks in its facade. It wasn't invincible. It was wounded, vulnerable. I had a chance. With a final, desperate cry, I lunged forward and drove the branch deep into its chest. The creature let out a shrill, ear-piercing scream, its body jerking violently before it collapsed to the ground. The air went still, and the weight in the atmosphere seemed to lift. I stood there, panting, my body aching, my heart still racing. The creature lay motionless, its eyes dull and lifeless. It was over. I had won against all odds. But as I looked around, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper, something more sinister, still lurked in the shadows. The mountain had given me a glimpse of its true power, and I wasn't sure if I could ever truly escape its grasp. As I stood over the lifeless form of the creature, I could feel the weight of the mountain pressing in on me. The victory, hard-won and bitter, had done little to ease the dread that settled deep within my bones. I had survived, but I knew that survival came at a price. Mount Rainier wasn't a place of ordinary wilderness. It wasn't just a national park, a safe haven for tourists and hikers. No, this mountain was ancient, teeming with secrets, some of which were far darker than I had ever imagined. I stumbled back from the creature's body, still unsure of what had happened. I wasn't even sure what the creature was, a monstrous amalgamation of nightmares, a thing that defied logic and biology. My mind raced as I tried to piece together the events that had led me to this moment. I had come here as a ranger, a scientist, looking for answers about the strange phenomena in the area. But instead, I had uncovered a world of horror that I wasn't prepared for. The stories I had heard about Mount Rainier, the ghostly whispers, the unnatural occurrences, the mysterious disappearances, suddenly seemed less like folklore and more like cold, hard truths. And I was certain that what I had just encountered wasn't the end of it. If anything, it felt like the beginning. I looked around the clearing, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that more creatures might be lurking in the shadows. But the forest was eerily still. The growls had stopped. There were no more signs of the creature's presence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the mountain was watching me, waiting for me to leave, or worse, for me to stay forever. As I made my way back to my camp, my thoughts were clouded with the implications of what I had learned. I had always believed that nature held its mysteries, but now I understood that some mysteries were better left unsolved. I had dared to uncover something ancient, something far older than I could comprehend. And I had paid for that curiosity with fear, with blood, and with the lingering suspicion that there was still so much more to learn and to fear. My friend, the other ranger, had disappeared a few days earlier without a trace, and I had no illusions about finding him alive. The mountain had taken him, just as it had taken others before him. I could only pray that his fate hadn't been the same as mine, that he hadn't encountered the creature I had faced and met the same gruesome end. The journey back to civilization was long, and as I descended the mountain, I couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation. The mountain had changed me. What I had witnessed, what I had fought, had left a mark on me that I could never erase. I knew that no matter how far I ran, the memories of that night would haunt me, the terrifying knowledge of what truly lurked in those woods. Mount Rainier wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing entity with a will of its own, and it wasn't done with me yet. I had survived the night, but the question that gnawed at me was whether anyone truly survives a place like Mount Rainier. The mountain had taken everything from me, the sense of safety, the belief in the world as I knew it. And as I looked back at the towering peak, its jagged silhouette dark against the sky, I wondered if I would ever escape its pull. The horrors I had faced were not just confined to the forest. They had seeped into my soul, and now, no matter how far I traveled, I would carry them with me, forever marked by the mountain, forever changed by the terror it had unleashed. Months have passed since I left Mount Rainier, but the memories still cling to me like a shadow. I've tried to move on, to tell myself it was just a nightmare, but deep down I know the truth. The creature, the mountain, it's not something I can forget. My nights are plagued by strange dreams, and the sounds of the forest echo in my mind, as if it's calling me back. I've stopped working as a ranger, unable to face the wilderness again. But I can't shake the feeling that the mountain is still waiting, watching for me to return. If this story has left you with chills, you're not alone. The mysteries of the mountains, the strange occurrences, and the creatures that lurk in the shadows are more than just a tale. They are a warning. If you've ever felt the call of the wilderness, be cautious. You may think you're ready, but some places, like Mount Rainier, hold secrets best left undisturbed. Have you had a strange encounter with the unknown? Share your own experiences in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. There's always more to uncover, and who knows what the next story will reveal.